What we've been dealing with for 30 years of cybersecurity, we're never going to 100% solve anything. It's going to be like, to what degree do we solve it? To what degree do we make it really difficult to compromise or to take advantage of? There's always going to be new techniques. It's going to be that cat and mouse game that we've been playing forever. It's no different. It's why we still have jobs. I love it. Let's go.
All right, welcome to the show, Rock.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Yeah, so you're a CISO, Chief Information Security Officer, and you've also spent a lot of time recently around AI and looking specifically around AI security. So for our audience here that's just tuning in, could you tell them a little about what are some of the dangers with implementing AI and specifically what got you interested from a CISO perspective in tackling this?
Yeah, so, I'd like to say that I'm a recovering CISO and now I play one on TV. Right. So I do consulting. I'm a fractional CISO. And, I've been getting a lot of phone calls over the last couple of years actually saying, hey, Rock, AI has left the train station. We know our organization is using their own personal ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude, whatever the case may be, Copilot. Can you help us wrap our arms around it from a governance standpoint? I'm like, yeah, sure. Absolutely. What are we governing? And then they pause and they're like, I just told you, idiot, AI. I'm like, no. Like, what are your use cases? AI, all the things is not a strategy, right? How do you quantify the value of those use cases? How do you prioritize them? How do you measure that they're working or not, that you don't become a statistic of a failed AI pilot, all of those things. And then, we start having that conversation and the conversation always goes back to, okay, well, what's your biggest fear with leveraging AI, particularly the vast majority of use cases within organizations right now are large language models, LLMs, or generative AI. So particularly with generative AI, and it comes down to the data. I'm like, great, okay. What does your data governance program look like?
Right.
Well, not great. It's hard. The last couple of CISOs have told us we should do something about it, right? Mm-hmm. So it's become a forcing function for that. So that really got me into it, and I've dove head first.
So what is the danger? So when I think of governance, I immediately think, okay, maybe this is a bit extreme. Okay, it's very extreme, but just like Skynet, like something goes catastrophically wrong. We plugged AI in and we expected it to do this, but it just deleted something or it took over and it just started running things. But what are the real dangers that an organization could expect to face? What could go catastrophically wrong?
Well, Replit, right, about a month ago, put out a very public use case around how it wiped out. I don't remember if it was I think it was a development database. I don't think it was an actual production database.
I think it was a production database, actually. Yeah, it was a production database.
Vibe coding wiped out prod, right?
Yep.
I mean,
it was being helpful. It thought it was solving the problem. It wasn't. I don't think it was doing it maliciously. It thought it was being helpful. It's like, I solved the problem. No more database. Yeah. Yeah.
That would solve a lot of our problems. But
right.
That's a different conversation.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, that's why like having guardrails is super important. And because of the kind of the non-deterministic and the probabilistic nature of generative AI, that's super hard to do. Like, in our traditional cybersecurity governance programs, I mean, everything it depends, but largely technology works or it doesn't, right? It's kind of black or white. We have a firewall rule, it's going to block it or not. We have DLP, it's going to detect it or maybe, right? Like that type of thing. We have a SIM, it will alert on something. It may be a false positive, false negative. In kind of like an AI world, let's say we're red teaming an AI.
So for our audience that's not familiar with red teaming, what is red teaming?
Yeah, red teaming is essentially acting as an adversary and trying to get the AI to do something that it's not supposed to do. So for instance, if you give ChatGPT, I'll just pick on them, but Claude, Gemini, anyone, a prompt, the same prompt 10 times, it will likely give you the same result 9 times out of 10, but that one time out of 10 might be slightly different. So from a red teaming perspective, like from a traditional red teaming or penetration testing perspective, I'm attacking your network or I'm attacking your application. I get in or I don't, right? I compromise the vulnerability or I don't compromise the vulnerability. From an AI standpoint, I may compromise it 10% of the time, maybe 5% of the time, maybe 20% of the time. How many times do I have to try, right? Send it these series of prompts before I just call it and like, you know what? That's good enough from a defensive standpoint.
So is it like Murphy's Law then? It's sort of like if it can go wrong, it will go wrong. If there's a 5 or 10% chance that even a 1% chance, even a 0.1% chance, right? If you're doing it, giving it so many different options, eventually over time, if it's not deterministic, as you were saying, there's a probability that that could happen. So Murphy's Law then will then kick in at some point. It's like this will eventually happen. Whether it's tomorrow or in a year, like this will happen.
Yeah, but if you look at the probabilities, right? Like you have to determine, right, based on your organization's risk appetite, A, where that threshold is, but B, if it's a once in 100,000 year event probability, do I care? I mean, depends on the impact, right? Probably not. I mean, even look at, yes, we've had some high profile cases around the New York Times and Samsung and their data getting leaked through prompts or whatever. But for you and I, and most organizations out there, think about the billions and billions of inputs OpenAI or Anthropic or Google are dealing with every day. The likelihood that our data shifts the model enough to where it's the data it's going to pull out, super minuscule, right? And it turns out to get the data, to get the New York Times data out and even the Samsung code out, you got to be really super specific with the prompts, right? Like you are trying to get it.
It's almost like a hacker type, or like you said, a red team type thing. It's like somebody, it's not going to necessarily happen on its own accidentally, but somebody could sort of force it to do something it wouldn't otherwise do. Is that?
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
Yeah.
And again, every organization is going to have their own risk appetite, like, what they allow in, what they don't allow in. From an AI governance perspective, there are absolutely best practices around the handling of data, sensitive data, particularly PII or PHI, right? Personal health information. Financial services has had model rules in place, model risk management in place for 15 years, right? At the machine learning level. So there are best practices to follow. This isn't like all being invented on the fly, but with generative AI now, it kind of adds that additional twist because of that non-deterministic nature of it.
So what are some of the guardrails then? So you said traditional AI governance is dead. So are those guardrails, maybe, is it tuning the LLM to try to make it more deterministic? I know there are ways to do that, but I don't know how reliable those are. Is it human in the middle? Is it a combination of things? What are some of the new ways that you have to govern AI?
Yeah, so when I made that kind of statement that traditional AI governance is dead, that was in the AI Cyber magazine article that I wrote for this summer's edition, right? And that's when I was proposing, like you mentioned it earlier, a gate, or at least what turned out to be a gate, and it was specifically around agentic AI and agentic AI security, because now, with agentic AI or AI agents, now we're turning things that just give us outputs really fast into things that can actually take action in the physical world, whether that be process a transaction, go purchase something, manage a PLC at an oil and gas plant, right? Monitor a safety system, adjust valves, whatever that case may be.
So this goes beyond just using Chat GPT, right? So when you say agentic AI, this is like putting into the code, like building into these systems that enterprises use, building an AI component, a function as part of the normal business process. Is that right?
Absolutely, right? And right, so there's an actual action taken at the end of it versus, hey, ChatGPT, analyze this data and kind of summarize it for me. What patterns am I missing? Versus that. And so that's why I say that traditional governance is dead. And we could get into that into a second. But if we're focusing on what we're largely talking about with regards to LLM or generative AI, or whatever, right? It's kind of it's a lot of the same things that we've been doing from a traditional cyber
Right.
perspective forever, just different, right? So input output validation, we've been doing that forever. Well, should have been doing that forever from a
Right.
right.
Yeah.
Prompt injection is the AI version of SQL injection.
Right.
We still largely haven't solved SQL injection. It's still on the OWASP top 10.
Can we solve prompt injection? I see some of these prompt injection techniques where there's like invisible characters or even stuff embedded in what looks like an emoji. And then that somehow can be embedded into the prompt. And then, bad stuff happens.
Can we solve it? I don't think, I mean, just like in, what we've been dealing with for 30 years of cybersecurity, we're never going to 100% solve anything. It's going to be like, to what degree do we solve it? To what degree do we make it really difficult to compromise or to take advantage of? And there's always going to be new techniques, right? We'll figure out the invisible font or even like document encoding problem, right? And something will come up with something different, right? Like there's a great paper launched a few weeks ago, prompt injection through agent cards. And agent cards are essentially an agent's call it passport or ID, right? So everybody's going to figure out
Yeah.
new methods, right? It's going to be that
Right.
cat and mouse game that we've been playing forever. It's no different. It's why we still have jobs. I love it. Let's go.
So part of that you said comes back to, not just the input and input validation, but we'll call it data classification. And this goes back to your earlier point around just what is data governance? What is your data governance policy? So is this going to force organizations to look at that through a different lens, maybe look at it more seriously, more carefully, look at data classification? What are some of the moving parts with that?
In my opinion, it's an absolute forcing function. And I have seen that with my clients, right? It's an absolute forcing function to go back and revisit those data governance programs or establish them, oftentimes from scratch. Because if you're truly concerned about the data that's going into whatever, an LLM, a machine learning model, into a RAG, a vector database, a retrieval augmented generation database, whatever the case may be, you don't have a shot in hell at being successful in protecting that data if it's not bagged and tagged at a fundamental level, right? If you don't actually know at a metadata level what it is and what you should be doing with it. So it's absolutely become a forcing function, and it's absolutely forced people to go back and take a look at their data governance programs differently, because now data provenance is also become super important. Do you understand the life cycle of the data from the second it was created to the second it's destroyed effectively? Although we know in this world, data is never really destroyed. It's copied 200 billion times, right? But, do you understand what's going on during that life cycle?
So let's take the case of hospitals. I don't know if you've worked with hospitals, but it seems like if there's ever a case for using AI, there's all kinds of use cases in a hospital scenario to use AI, right? From just transcribing doctor's notes to actually doing diagnoses. That information, whether it gets put into a RAG database, which is like the separate database that can be used with AI, or I don't know, maybe like fine-tuned or embedded into LLMs itself. I don't know, but like, what are the things that could go wrong there? It seems like there's a lot of good things that could happen. So maybe we can talk about like all the good stuff that AI could do in a healthcare scenario specifically, but what specifically are the bad stuff that could happen in healthcare, for example?
Yeah. What could possibly go wrong, right? But we can say that for everything, right? And I mean, some of the good things that we've already seen, right? Detecting diseases, cancer earlier, right? Malignant tumors earlier in the process than what a traditional radiology scan would have determined. Helping doctors with diagnoses, particularly very rare diseases, identifying other patterns. We're seeing it, being used a lot with drug interactions, right? And yeah, there's a drug that used to do A, but now we really think it could do B, that type of stuff. So there's a lot of positive, but again, trust but verify the outputs, and more verified than trust, I would say. We're humans and we tend to over rely on AI. Like, here's this thing that we're all worried about. Is it going to turn into Skynet? But oftentimes we trust the output implicitly. And if it ever becomes Skynet, I don't think it is, it's going to be because we trusted it implicitly. So, from that perspective, we still need radiologists. We still need eyes-on images. we're far away from being able to automate all that away, right? We still need doctors making human decisions. We still need that human in the loop. And we will, in my opinion, for a long time. Now, is it a force multiplier? Does it allow you to make better decisions faster? Yes, as long as you understand how to use it correctly. And that goes for any use case, healthcare or otherwise. Now with healthcare specifically, you've got the really sensitive issue with PHI. And once you put something into a training model, a piece of data into a training model, there's no way to surgically carve it out right now.
Right.
So if you spend a couple $1,000,000 training a model and realize, oh, we weren't supposed to have PHI in here, but some records got in,
Right.
bye-bye, $2 million, right? That may be a resume generating event.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, right. So you have, certainly data governance concerns there, regulatory concerns there with HIPAA and privacy and all that kind of stuff.
Right. But it seems after a certain point, these things are getting better and better. There should be a human in the loop and there should be these things in place. But if it's just, I don't mean to sound crass about it, but just like a risk management, formula at the end of the day, it's like, well, we can tolerate this much bad that happens. Here's all the good that's going to happen. We'll just tolerate the bad so we can have maybe less doctors and less people looking at these things. Is it going to come down to that?
Well, I mean, we could have the conversation all day long about how big business medicine and insurance companies have become, right? And maybe that's probably a different podcast. And so I think it's inevitable. Everybody's looking at AI with regards to, hey, how can I save costs? And what's our biggest cost? It's G&A and overhead and payroll and all that kind of stuff, right? So, and it's always going to be like an ebb and flow. Like, I think we'll probably see a pendulum swing one way of like reduced staffing. And then there'll be this big boom event and this massive multi-billion-dollar class action lawsuit, and it'll start swinging the other way. And we're probably a ways off from seeing where that equilibrium is going to land. I mean, healthcare in particular needs to be, I think, super risk averse.
Right.
I don't know, another less regulated organization, maybe less, right? It all depends on the use case and what's the outcome. Right. And that's kind of one of the things that's special with AI governance is we're focusing on the outcomes more versus with regards to cybersecurity governance, we were largely focusing on the risk. We're focusing on the outcomes more. What are the human harms that can come of it, right? What privacy harms, what economic harms, what discriminatory harms, right? Like those types of things that we need to consider from an AI governance standpoint.
So what specific harms do you see coming next in this regard, especially looking specifically, we'll pick on OpenAI and we'll pick on ChatGPT since they're kind of the 800-pound gorilla or 8 million-pound gorilla in this case in the AI world of what's coming next that for all the new stuff that they're bringing.
Yeah, I don't even think we have to look at next. We have to look at what's going on right now, right? They're getting sued left and right by essentially AI-assisted suicide, right? And it kind of goes.
Is that going to slow them down, though?
No. I think just within the last couple of weeks, there's another case brought against ChatGPT. I think that's the whole, I don't know. I don't want to presume to think what's that Sam Altman's thinking because God only knows. But, he's announced, hey, we're going to release an OpenAI adult mode, right? And it's on you. Like, be an adult, be responsible. And we could have the philosophical question around what that does, with regards to people with mental health issues and how do you, or if you screen to allow them to get access to that level of GPT, right? There's a lawsuit that was filed. I read the article about it a couple of days ago, so I can't say exactly when it was filed, about GPT 4.0 specifically and the lack of guardrails on it. And that model in particular is the one that unfortunately people have abused, right, to cause harm to themselves. We have the character AI incident from about a year ago. I don't know what model they use on the back end, right? Where unfortunately a teenager committed suicide. And yeah, so to me, what could possibly go harm? It's going to be like the the people who can't fend for themselves, right? Who are relying on AI for a thing.
Yeah.
There may be mental health issues involved. There may be physical health issues involved, and they can't afford to go to a doctor, so they're trying to get
Right.
OpenAI or any AI to be their doctor, right?
Yeah.
And I do a lot of volunteer work with the Open Web Application Security Project, Generative AI Security Initiatives, and there's a reason why over reliance is on the top 10 vulnerability list for LLMs,
Mm,
right? But that's a human factor thing.
yeah.
That's not a technology
Sure.
vulnerability that we're
Sure.
going to
Yeah.
like that we can patch.
Yeah. It's a societal problem. Yeah, of
Yeah.
course. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you were talking earlier about agentic AI and all of these models. So we have ChatGPT, and most of us have played with it. We know what the interface is like, or Claude or whatever. So an agentic AI, they're kind of plugging in, we'll call it on the back end, and using it in that way, but it's still using the same model, or, there's different sort of versions of the model to choose from. When you're making recommendations to your clients that you're working with around data governance and stuff, what are some of the factors that you have them consider to talk about using ChatGPT versus Claude versus Gemini versus some of these other models? Because when we say AI, we kind of use it as an all-encompassing term, but are the models the same? Is OpenAI basically the same as DeepSeek or Claude?
I think they have different capabilities, and or they're good at different things, right? Like in my experience, and I don't have any scientific studies to pull up right now to reference it, but in my experience, ChatGPT is better at reasoning and deep research. Claude is better at writing and coding. Never use DeepSeek. But Gemini is doing really well in the coding space as well, also. So I think you have to evaluate your use case. Organizations are, a lot of organizations are trying to standardize on something, right? They want to, get some economies of scale, go on the enterprise plan. I get it. People are ultimately going to bring their own AI, right? They're, if they prefer Claude because, Claude skills are awesome and it's easier for them to use, and OpenAI doesn't have that capability yet, they're going to find a way to use Claude. So, for me, I would regulate or govern, I should say govern. We can talk about regulation later if you want, because I definitely have thoughts. We can govern, we should govern the risk and not
Yeah,
necessarily the technology behind it. Just like, we govern network security and what traffic is allowed on the network, and we don't govern Palo Alto versus Cisco versus Fortinet.
right, right, right. So for organizations that are implementing AI, do you see some that are trying to, we'll call it, use private AI? So in other words, instead of using one of the APIs, so using the latest and greatest model that's out there, but sort of not being able to control how that organization, we don't know, we can just hope that they're abiding by the terms of service, but even then it can be murky in terms of how they're using the data, to instead say, hey, I'm going to stand up our own, AI in-house. Maybe we use Llama. So Meta has open sourced their LLM. So maybe it's not quite as powerful or not quite as capable, but it might be good enough for some things. Do you see any organizations going down that road?
Yeah, absolutely. And funny enough, it's not usually the data privacy conversation. I'll say amongst my clients, probably 50-50, but a lot of it is cost control, right? Because you pull it in house, you've got a cloud instance. We could predict cloud costs pretty well at this point, right? But token cost, totally different story. Actually, that's funny. I actually released a tool last week doing some basic token cost calculations, right? And oftentimes, what a lot of people don't realize is that bigger context windows aren't always better. In fact, they get really expensive really fast as you accumulate context. And then also the output tokens, so what you generate, is 4 to 5 times as expensive usually as what you put into the model, right? And so I'm seeing a lot of like those models get pulled in house, right? Like you mentioned, Llama or whatever off the Hugging Face, as a cost function.
Yeah, and I'm sure that those, almost like CPU costs, right? Like Moore's law, it's gonna get more powerful and cheaper over time. But yeah, I hadn't thought of that until I saw your post on LinkedIn about that recently. I hadn't considered that and hadn't considered how quickly the cost went up too in terms of the token generation,
Yeah.
right? And it's like, oh, the context, I'm asking a follow-up question, then another follow-up question, then another follow-up question. The context window builds, but then like the cost just sort of balloons exponentially, or it can at least if you don't have some guardrails around that.
Yeah,
So
like on most of the
yeah,
models, like over 200,000 tokens, you start paying a premium for that
yeah,
context accumulation, right? And so it's funny. I learned it's not funny. It's funny to me, I guess. It happened to me, so I could call it funny. I learned the hard way. So my first foray into into vibe coding was using Claude Code, and
right.
I'm a self-proclaimed Claude Code junkie. So I'll just get it out at this point.
I've played with it too. It is good. It is good at generating code, at
Yeah,
least
and
Python code.
I've
Yeah.
gotten a lot better at it. But my first foray at it, I didn't realize I was using the Opus 4 at the time
Okay.
for the model. I'm like, oh, it's the latest one. I've heard all these good things about it generating code.
Yeah.
Awesome, I'll use that.
Latest is greatest. Yep.
5 times as expensive as
Yeah.
at that time it was Sonnet 3.7, 4 and 4.5 hadn't come out yet. 5 times as expensive.
Wow.
So I'm coding away, and my bill is just racking up. Like my first vibe coding project probably, God, and I hope my wife doesn't watch this, cost me 3 grand, right, out of pocket. Until I kind of, by the time I realized
Wow.
and tweaked the model. So I started thinking about it then, and then a friend approached me. It's like, hey, I'm working with a small business. They want to put a chatbot on their website. I mean, they're a startup. They're just, they're like servicing local long-term healthcare facilities. How do I financially model this? I'm like, okay. And funny enough, the tool I mentioned, I vibe coded over it took me about, I don't know, maybe 4 hours total over the course of a couple days. Like I said, very basic rudimentary, but at least it lets you go in and like start somewhere.
When I was using Claude, at least, maybe I wasn't using Claude code. I was just using Claude,
Like in the
and
browser.
yeah, in the browser, and or not in the browser. I had the app,
Oh yeah.
which not that it matters that much, but the cost was fixed because I'm just paying $20 or 25
Yeah.
bucks or whatever it is a month. But I would run into these rate limits. So it'd say, okay, you've used up all your tokens, come back in 5 hours, and then you can do more again. And I know, in your case, it's just like you give them the credit card and then it's just racking up on the back end. And if you're not paying really good attention to it, you can get a big bill at the end. So
Yeah. And that's the difference people don't realize, right? Like
yeah,
the API costs legit money,
yeah,
right? Versus your $20 a month subscription or $200 a month subscription, right? And that API is going to generate, if you're coding, potentially a lot of data. And as I mentioned earlier, that output is 4 to 5 times more expensive than the input, right? So I mean, just keep that in mind. Like with coding projects, like good thing for me, I hadn't really coded in 20 years. Now I wouldn't say I'm prolific, but I have tackled more challenges and projects than I would have otherwise as a result. We just have to be conscious of that.
So one of the other new features, I don't know if it's new, but relatively new features with these AI models is MCP. So you'd mentioned a RAG database earlier. So MCP, as I understand it, maybe you can elaborate on this, is a way that we can plug in other kinds of data sets into our models and use them to help, augment the knowledge that the model has of something.
Yep. Ironically enough, literally before hopping on here to record this podcast, I was having a conversation with someone. I will never use an API again if I don't have to, right? Because of MCP. The awesome thing with MCP is what it does. So if you think about APIs, you have to know and understand the API spec, and everybody's API spec is different, and right, which could cause a lot of like development effort. MCP abstracts that layer, and instead of saying, "Hey, which calls does this API expose?" And me having to go do that research and understand the API interface, MCP provides a standardized wrapper around all of that to where you essentially connect to the MCP, and it says, "Hi, thank you for connecting. Here's what's available to you. What would you like to call?" Oh, you want to call insert database? Cool. And then it handles everything on the back end of that. In my opinion, it's fantastic. Ripe with other types of security issues, which we're trying to tackle from an OWASP perspective as well. We just released an MCP cheat sheet around leveraging third-party MCPs within your organizations. We will be working on. Actually, the team is already working on. I can't take any credit for it. I'm not on that team. A similar cheat sheet for developing MCP servers. Yeah, just keep an eye on that space. Just keep an eye on that space because I think what does MCP 2.0 look like or 3.0 look like? I don't know. But right now it makes development a lot easier and it makes tools that agents call a lot more accessible.
So does this also fall under the CISO umbrella then? Because, we're talking about data and data security. So we have AI and LLMs, and now we have MCP. Like, it keeps getting worse. The fire hose is being turned on even stronger, it seems.
Yeah, I think the answer is it depends, and it depends on the organization. And because I have some clients where all that kind of largely falls on the security organization, on the CISO, if product security falls under them. If product security falls under the product organization with maybe a dotted line into security, is going to fall under product. AI governance, sometimes run by the CISO, sometimes run out of legal, sometimes run out of the data office, like whoever's chairing it. What I have seen is there hasn't been a ton of budget specifically for AI security tooling out of
Yeah.
the security org. What I have seen is that budget coming from a combination of security, legal, data, and product, oftentimes product. And so, which tells me a couple things. One, that there hasn't been a big boom event yet for that budget to start like ballooning in the security org. But the fact that a lot of it is coming out of the product org tells me that at least they're aware. There's more of a pull, like, hey, we need this, versus from a traditional cybersecurity standpoint, over the years, they've been like, hey, product teams, please do this. So at least there's an awareness out there that AI security is important and different.
Yeah, I think, because a lot of these things are productized, right? So if I'm just, on the marketing team or something like that, and we're just using Claude to help us generate content for the site, and now suddenly Claude has more features, I can click a button and suddenly add in MCP servers and maybe connect it to some of our in-house data. Some of that seems like because it's already been authorized by the organization to use Claude, some of this other stuff can just kind of slip in under the radar. And is there a danger in that? It's just like kind of this slippery slope of like, well, when we adopted this thing of Claude, it only did this at the time when we authorized it. And now a year later, 18 months later, now it can do a lot more. And now the risk is higher.
Absolutely, right. There's like a authentication creep there, right? And authorization creep, I should say. People focus a lot on authentication and they're not focusing nearly enough on authorization. So if you go in and connect your Google Drive to Cloud right now, it's going to have the same through the desktop app. It's going to have the same permissions that you have to your Google Drive. Now, let's say you're a marketing person, right? And you wanted to help like make some marketing slicks and you've got some information to feed it. That's great. But what if you also have a preview to some sensitive, not yet announced features of the product, right? And Claude gets a hold of that, and that gets out there to the market too early, right? That could pose a problem, a significant problem from a competitive advantage standpoint. So that's what people aren't realizing right now, at least through the desktop applications, like when you go hook in Claude or what OpenAI, whatever, to an MCP server, there's not a finer grain control that you can give it right now, other than what you have access to. And you may not want to have access to everything that you have access to.
Yeah, and that goes back to the data governance piece you talked about at the
Yeah.
beginning. So you were part of a research project, I believe it was called AA Gate,
Yeah.
that had a lot of really cool stuff to help with governance. Could that project help in a case like this? And if so, how? And what are some of the other things that AA Gate could do?
So thanks. Yeah, so we released it last week with a couple, I would say, conspirators, a few of them from,
We all need co-conspirators, yes.
yeah, a few of them from the Open Web Application Security Project, or OWASP. It stands for Agentic AI Governance, Assurance, and Trust Engine. It's
Did
a
you use
Kubernetes.
AI to come up with that acronym?
Of course I did. Come on. Of course I did. I'm like, here's what I came up with. Give me some options. So when I wrote about traditional AI governance is dead, it's because of the actions that agentic AI can take, and the fact that we need better visibility, and frankly better logging and monitoring around those agent decisions, right? So it starts to introduce the concepts of using distributed ledgers, right, for immutable logging. So
Gotcha.
you have full explainability and transparency about what the
So
agent did.
like a blockchain type thing.
Yes, people always cringe, and believe it or not,
Yeah.
blockchain's not the only distributed ledger out there, but that's what people automatically go to.
I have to put a little bit of cringe in every episode here on Data and Confused. So there it is.
Yeah, yeah. Treating agents as separate identities, as non-human identities. Using minimal authorization scopes that could be in the span of milliseconds, right? What an agent can do and when. Having distributed identity stores, right? So essentially, how do you identify an agent? How do you identify that's supposed to be doing what it's doing at the time it's supposed to be doing it? So introducing, yes, another cringy buzzword, zero trust principles into the agentic system. And how do you go about doing that? Like really the impetus of the idea was, we talk about this. What are some ways leveraging technology available today that we can operationalize this? And there's, if you look at the paper, it's on archive, or just go to my LinkedIn or whatever, you'll see about kind of like the architecture that we developed, how it aligns to the NIST AI risk management framework and its functions of govern, map, measure, manage. And, it's not, and there's a MVP, a very minimal viable, I wouldn't even call it product, minimum viable proof of concept out on GitHub. So go play with it. Would love to hear ideas. Would love to hear you guys are on crack. Here's how you can improve it. Here's what I would add to it. It's open source. Grab it, fork it, play with it, contribute.
What's your idea behind doing this to just dabble in it and say, hey, here's an idea of some ways to do it, and just throw it out to the community to take it in whatever direction? Or are you thinking to productize it? Is there a product here behind this?
I mean, never say never. I honestly haven't put too much thought into it. Probably someone will pick it up. We've got a lot of agentic AI securities out there, security companies out there. But really the idea was like, hey, everybody's jumping into the deep side of the pool with agentic AI without, forget looking to see how deep the pool is, if there's even water in the pool, right? And so the thought behind the article that originally went into this was around that. Like everybody's diving headfirst in. They don't understand the unique challenges that agentic AI brings on top of just general like LLMs that everybody's using. So, what are some things to consider? The orchestrator agent that we talk about in the paper, or what we call the Janus system. Janus was the Roman two-faced deity, right? To where you're speaking out of both sides of your mouth, where you have one kind of monitor and governance agent and the other side of the ecosystem doing the things, right? So yeah, that was all meant to put out there with the community. And then I started thinking about, hey, this was actually a decent idea and a decent article that I wrote. How do we start to action some of this? So, brought in some friends, and here we are.
Right. So how would a company get started if they were just getting into AI? Do they start with a tool? Do they start with a fractional CISO and doing an assessment? What's the first step?
Never start with a tool. Never start with a tool. Whether it's a fractional CISO or, somebody adept at AI governance, that may be a fractional chief AI officer, right? And also, I would say not only AI governance, but AI security, right? They need to be able to understand why you're governing the things that you're governing, and then how to actually implement that governance, right? Because if the controls that you put in place aren't actually operationalizable, right? You cannot actually operate them, then what's the point? And we see that often in cybersecurity. Hey, you've got to do this because SOC 2 says so. Okay, great. Does it apply, or can we even do this in our environment? So, or is it cost prohibitive to do in our environment? So yeah, so whether that's whatever title that person is, yeah, I would bring it. If you don't have that expertise in-house, definitely bring somebody in and do an evaluation. Like you do an AI readiness assessment. ISO 42001 and the EU AI Act have like AI readiness assessment and risk assessment methodologies pretty well mapped out that you could follow from a best practice standpoint. Are they the greatest? Am I saying they're gold? They're best practices, right? Like take it and adapt it for your organization. But you don't have to start from scratch.
Right, right. And then you mentioned regulations earlier, and we'll end on this thought about regulations. So are there any current laws in place, or are there any movements by governments to look at some ISO standard or to put regulatory frameworks in place and to enforce those? And what would that look like? And what should organizations anticipate ahead of time to make sure that they're not, having to go back and rework a bunch of stuff after a regulation gets put in place?
Yeah, so the answer is yeah, absolutely. The global gold standard right now is the European Union AI Act, and that's actually, live and being enforced. And I advise companies that even if you don't operate in the European Union, the United States is doing what we do best and going to have 50 different minimum AI regulations. I live in Colorado, so we had the first in-country one that passed, not the first in nation one to go into effect, but it aligned itself decently to the EU AI Act. So what I tell organizations is align to the EU AI Act, particularly the EU AI Act Code of Practice, and use that as your high bar, or I guess you could say your minimum bar, because if you're meeting that, you're probably going to have a lot easier time meeting any new regulations coming down the pipe. So on the other side of OWASP, there's a project called the OWASP AI Exchange, where we focus heavily on operationalizing the EU AI Act. So there's a lot of great resources there as well.
Is there anything happening in Canada, or is Canada also aligned with EU as far as you know?
So interesting. So they had a law on the books in place that was actually going to replace PIPEDA, their privacy standard, their privacy regulation, and that fell through the cracks, or that didn't pass. So I don't know. There's a short of it. I don't know exactly what's going on in Canada right now. I'm sure it'll get revisited, but even here in the States, I mean, it's hard to keep up. California's got 1,000 measures that seem to be in some sort of state within their legislature. They just passed a big one with regards to regulating the frontier models, OpenAI, Claude, Gemini primarily.
Right. Yeah.
Trying to hold them accountable for things. But
that'll be interesting to see how that plays out, because that's going to be lots of lawsuits, I predict. Since those guys are all Silicon Valley companies, right? So they fall under the purview of California. And I mean, everyone operates in California anyway, but even if they weren't.
Different conversation.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
I don't know. I don't know if there's a coincidence that the sitting governor is termed out and won't be accepting any more campaign funds from them, and the timing of him passing the bill. So TBD what his future plans are.
Yeah. Who knows all the webs that are weaved there. So
it's crazy.
Rock, thank you so much. This has been amazing. I learned a lot, and I really appreciate you taking the time to share all of your knowledge about AI governance today. So thank you.
Appreciate you. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you so much for tuning in to Data and Confused. I really appreciate you listening. Please go ahead and subscribe as I get this podcast off the ground. I have a lot of amazing guests planned, industry experts and thought leaders from the tech and cybersecurity world. So look forward to seeing you in future episodes. Thank you.